far northern reaches of the world, there exists a region of land connecting North America to Asia, known as Beringia. 20,000 years ago, this region was a flat expanse of dry land, partially covered in glaciers and ice sheets. But as time went on and the Ice Age ended, the glaciers melted and fed into the oceans, raising the ocean level until the water crept across the broad expanse and split it apart into the Bering Strait. The drowning of the land bridge under this 50-odd meters of water separated the continents of Asia and North America. But in the thousands of years that the land bridge existed, life moved across it, settling both continents. One of these species was Homo sapiens, who followed the so-called Kelp Highway across Beringia, from Asia into North and then South America. About 70 to 60,000 years ago, it was the height of the Ice Age, and because of the low sea level, Beringia emerged as a land bridge between Asia and North America. But it wasn't just some easy bridge to cross, it wasn't just a nice, convenient expanse of flat land. This was the Ice Age, and we're talking about a region that's very close to the planet's northern pole. Glaciers blanketed Scandinavia and the northern chunk of Western Europe. They blanketed much of Siberia and almost all of Canada in massive ice sheets. These sheets of ice were hundreds of meters thick, sometimes thousands, and their immense weight crept along the ground and pummeled the topsoil into a very fine sediment. Beringia itself was a refuge, a moderately open area bordered on the east and the west by both mountains and glaciers. These land features were traversable for most life coming from Asia, but the ice sheets over North America were just too extensive, and the land too rugged and difficult for animals to move across. The Beringia Refuge was a relatively humid place, receiving the wet air coming off the North Pacific Ocean. This humidity made the climate of the land bridge relatively stable and ripe for life. To the east and the west, the land got drier and colder. Inner Siberia and inner North America retained their continental climates, with relatively dry air and large temperature differences between day and night, and summer and winter. The global climate at the time was particularly cold and dry, so these continental regions would have been very harsh for life. But in the relatively humid heartland of Beringia, there was a humble ecology of grasses and mosses, dotted with stands of cold-tolerant trees, like the ubiquitous birch, larch, and spruce trees. The ice ages are cyclical, and even within each ice age, there are cycles of temperature fluctuation measured in tens of thousands of years. Global temperatures were generally warming up until about 25 to 30,000 years ago, mirrored by an increasing density of heavier vegetation like trees. But evidence in the form of fossilized pollen shows that during the later ice age, called the late glacial maximum, temperatures cooled again, and the climate could no longer support forests of trees. It was just too much biomass that required too much water. Tree pollen became less and less common, and the pollen of herbaceous species, characteristic of tundra and montane grassland, became more and more common. Many animals were also a common sight in Beringia, attracted to its relative warmth and its humidity, and thus its propensity for vegetation. Where there are grasses and lichens and mosses to eat, there are going to be herbivores. And where there are herbivores, there are almost certainly bound to be predators. Charismatic megafauna like the woolly mammoth, the steppe bison, and the saiga antelope migrated into Beringia, as well as horses, bears, and lions, with some species spreading further east into North America, and others going further west into Asia. This window of migration was opened shortly after the Bering Land Bridge emerged from the shrinking Pacific Ocean, around 60,000 years ago, and it lasted until about 24,000 years ago. Around this time, around 24,000 years ago, the ice sheets bordering Beringia to its east had collided and merged. The Cordilleran ice sheet ran down eastern and central Alaska to Oregon, and the much larger Laurentide ice sheet blanketed most of Canada. 24,000 years ago, the Cordilleran ice sheet crashed into and merged with the Laurentide, and this blocked off any chance for a migrating animal to cross between the continents. The glaciers were simply too large, too rugged and slippery and unstable, such that any animal trying to walk across a glacier was at great risk of falling into a crevice, or falling off of a cliff of ice, or otherwise hurting itself. It also risked starving due to the simple fact that there's a lack of any kind of vegetation to eat, because nothing grows on top of an ice sheet. This impassable glacial terrain existed for more than 10,000 years, but by 13,000 years ago, the warming climate had melted the glaciers and made the ice sheets recede farther north. The receding glaciers opened up the Yukon Corridor, a strip of passable land connecting Beringia to the mainland of North America. The climate continued to warm for another 2,000 to 3,000 years before entering another 3,000-year period of cooling. Essentially, by 11,000 years ago, this created a traversable strip of land running along the coasts of Eastern Asia and Western North America. Now, you might think that the Yukon Corridor is an obvious travel route that the humans might have used to migrate across Beringia into the New World. You might also think that the coastal route was the obvious corridor that they would have taken. However, there's a lot of discussion and disagreement over who migrated across Beringia into the Americas and when. It's generally agreed that the source populations for the human migration came from eastern Siberia, because these eastern Siberians share several major lineages of mitochondrial DNA with Native American populations. This is evidence of the maternal lineage linking Native American descendants with their eastern Siberian ancestors. The problem is that there's evidence of human settlements and human hunting and food preparation that have been found all over North and South America, dating from far before 11,000 years ago, when the Yukon Corridor supposedly opened up in the first place. For example, there's the 12,500-year-old El Abra site in the Colombian department of Cundinamarca, the Monteverde site in southern Chile, which is believed to be 15 to 18,500 years old, the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter site in Pennsylvania, which is anywhere from 16 and 19,000 years old, and the Cactus Hill site in Virginia that's 16 to 20,000 years old. A lot of these findings indicate that peoples existed in the Americas far before the Clovis culture, which is widely believed to be the primary founding population in the New World. There are several theories to explain the chronology of the migrations and the expansion of peoples across the Rocky Mountains and the North American plains, and across the jungles and grasslands of South America. One theory posits that the first migrations came in a brief burst of waves, all within the last 20,000 years. Another theory posits that the first people came way before this, as far back as 40,000 years ago, which was then followed some 20 to 30,000 years later by a second wave of migrants. The spread of peoples into South America is believed to have happened relatively rapidly, as groups of humans migrated southward along the coasts, going from the Cascadia region of northwest North America down the California coast into Mexico and Mesoamerica, and then further south along the coasts and into the jungles of South America. There's a theory called the Clovis First theory, and this posits that the Clovis culture were the first people to come into the New World, into the Americas, as they followed the big game animals that they hunted across Beringia. They would follow herds of caribou and mammoth and hunt them with bone-tipped spears. This perpetual hunting and chasing after prey populations brought them into competition and conflict with the predators of Beringia and North America, including the short-faced bear. Don't get confused by the name. These were huge bears, larger than polar bears, which are the largest living bears today. The short-faced bears had legs that were longer and more muscular than a grizzly bear. They could run quickly, and their long limbs and their heavy paws allowed them to strike with deadly force. They would have been able to kill entire human hunting parties, and depending on how aggressive they were, they might have been incredibly dangerous monsters that slowed human migration across Beringia. Anyway, the progressive migration that came from following prey animals would have taken the Clovis culture through the Yukon Corridor, across Western Canada, into the mainland United States. Although this theory isn't perfect, it's troubled by evidence that suggests that the Yukon Corridor wasn't opened up or heavily used when the first signs of the Clovis people began showing up in the North American mainland. Another theory argues that the first peoples who came to the New World migrated along a fertile coastal waterway that was traversed with boats. The peoples of Southeast Asia and Oceania were, and are, excellent seafarers, engaging in large-scale boat-based migration for thousands of years. It's possible that some of these people moved along the coast of East Asia, across the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, and down along the western coast of the Americas, reaching South America some 20 or so thousand years ago. This would also make sense, as a waterfaring style of migration would explain the stunningly rapid spread of humans from Asia across Beringia to South America. A related idea is called the Kelp Highway hypothesis, which argues that the shallow coastal habitats created marine biomes dense with kelp forests, and that these zones of high ecological productivity would have supported fish populations and grazing bird and mammal populations, and these in turn would have supported and fed human populations as they migrated along the Kelp Highway. All of these theories and hypotheses are each supported by a host of facts, but each also has its own problems and gaps that just require more data. The theories and hypotheses are currently competing for validation, with each new discovery, like tools or carved bones or skeletal remains, offering new insights into the human story. Whatever the exact dates are, whoever the specific peoples were, the biggest fact that stands uncontested and undoubted is that Beringia played a critical role in human migration. Whether Beringia offered some sort of land-based travel corridor, or it created a continuous coastal region for human seafarers, this ancient landscape served as a critical point of migration for our species. Now that the Ice Age has ended and the water level has risen, Beringia is largely submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean, its fossils and its archaeological secrets hidden beneath hundreds of feet of water.